Good afternoon. If everyone could take their seats, please. And if everyone could take their cell phones and please turn them off or put them on silent for our meeting, that would be great. We'll come to order here shortly. Thank you, everyone, and welcome to the first meeting of CSRIC 5. I'd like to turn this over to our designated federal officer, Jeff Goldthorpe.
Thanks, John, and I'll add my welcome as well. Thank you all for either returning from CSRIC 4 or joining us anew at CSRIC 5. It's great to see you all here, and appreciate you joining us on this sunny day. It is sunny today, isn't it? So, and it's not quite so hot. So now, today we'll be doing something a little bit different. I'll return to that when we get through the opening remarks, but it's the first of its kind. I've never done a CSRIC or an NRIC meeting like this, for that matter, and so it'll be a little bit interesting. So bear with us. We're starting early. We've never started so soon after the charter was enacted, and that's good news. So, John, I'm going to turn it back over to you with that, and then we'll get into the opening remarks.
So I think the first thing is to call the meeting, to order, and maybe the opening remarks of the chairman first. That's the way it flows here. So thank you very much, Chairman Wheeler, for being here. We'd love to hear your opening remarks.
Well, John, thank you. And you're the chairman here of this group, so I'll go second or whatever if you want. I want to begin by thanking all of you for participating in CSRIC 5. John, thank you in particular for agreeing to chair it. You did double duty here. We stuck John with the tail end of CSRIC 4 and said, oh, by the way, you're going to be the chairman of CSRIC 5 as well, and we're grateful to you for doing that. And and I was commenting on John's bow tie earlier. As you all know, the passing of Ralph Roberts, the founder of Comcast, who was noted for his bow tie, and that Comcast leaders like John are wearing Ralph Roberts in memoriam bow ties. It's just a fabulous idea, and I'm glad you're doing that, and have brought that little bit of panache to this meeting too. This kind of group is the ultimate in the multi-stakeholder process that is much talked about and which we believe in strongly at this agency. The way in which you make progress to resolve complex issues across many varied fields is through an open multi-stakeholder process. So I'm grateful to you all for the time commitment that you're about to make in making this multi-stakeholder process work. Before I was fortunate enough, to get this job, I was chairman of a similar group, the Technology Advisory Council here at the Commission, and we had a rule at that point in time that I hope that you will follow as well, and that as chairman, I can say I expect will be followed. And that is that we're looking for actionable recommendations. This is not a discussion society. This is not a salon to talk about interesting issues. we need from you actionable recommendations that the Commission can use to pursue our responsibilities. And this body has certainly lived up to that in the past, and I expect it will continue to. CSRIC 4 was a huge success. That's good news and bad news. The good news, of course, is the huge success. The bad news is the challenge has been laid down for all of you to continue that tradition. And I think it's fair to say that what the Admiral and John have worked up for this iteration of CSRIC is even more challenging than the very significant issues that CSRIC 4 dealt with. We have to continue to deal with emergency services and alerting systems in the middle of evolving networks. I mean, we can never forget that Section 1 of the Communications Act says that our responsibility is to protect public safety. It's the first thing the first instruction the Congress gave us. So there'll be a lot of work done on that by this group. We need your leadership on infrastructure resiliency, because as infrastructure changes, the factors that have made it resilient over the years and have evolved over time change as well. And interestingly enough, just had a presentation this morning talking about how even some of those factors begin to feel their age, and their resiliency gets challenged. So we're looking for you to address the resiliency challenges, because if the message doesn't go through, then there's no reason to have the network, or the network has failed. And then, of course, we're really interested in your guidance to us on the whole cybersecurity issue. And I'm glad to see that there are new faces on the committee who in particular focus on cybersecurity. I was about to say you only have to pick up the newspaper, and then I realized I was dating myself by that reference. You only have to click on something to see what's going on in terms of the incredible, ever-expanding, ever more creative, ever more challenging, threatening cybersecurity realities that we face. CSRIC 4 helped us to develop the new paradigm for dealing with cybersecurity in the nation's networks. Now we got to put that into practice. And we're going to look to you for leadership on that, on basic issues such as information sharing, such as how do we succeed in awareness and priority setting at board meetings and in the C-suite, and what's the appropriate role that we as an agency ought to have in that. How do we manage through this new structure building on CSRIC 4, where we will be voluntarily sitting down with networks to review the challenges that they are having. It's one thing to say, okay, here's what the plan's going to be, here's how we're going to structure it. It's something else to actually put it into effect, and we're going to need your help on that. And something that Admiral Simpson has been appropriately pushing on is the workforce challenge that we face. And how do we get, and I see John nodding his head here out of the corner of my eye, how do we get people, young people, trained in cybersecurity issues so they can move into the increasing needs inside corporate structures for this kind of skill set? So this is a pretty broad agenda, from public safety to network reliability to cybersecurity and everything in between. So my only purpose of being here today is, again, to say thank you to you, and again, to say I'm looking for your recommendations for actions that a responsible agency and responsible industries should take to make sure that this really important mission of how our networks function is protected and preserved going forward. So thank you very much to all of you. And John, I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Wheeler. Thank you for those insightful comments. I'm delighted to serve on this committee with this talented group of leaders, and I think we're up for the challenge that the chairman just provided us around actionable recommendations. So with that, we'll move to our next item on the agenda and get some opening remarks from Admiral Simpson.
Great. Well, I want to get right into what we hope to accomplish today. But first, thank all of you for participating in this. It's an amazing array of talent that either your companies or you as individuals have committed to make over the course of the next 2 years, and we appreciate that commitment. And I want to thank you in advance for the hard work you're going to do, because I know there's going to be some hard work associated with this. I'd also like today to pass on the charge that we are going to describe today, and they're basically the questions that we feel that we would like help from the multi-stakeholder group to inform our policy activities, but the whole range of activities that the Commission can engage in. Sometimes just facilitating the right meeting at the right time with the right parties is the right thing for a regulator to do. So your advice to us vis-a-vis these questions is extremely useful. So today we're organized to have the liaisons, the FCC liaisons for each of the lines of questions to present those questions and describe what we're looking to get from the group. We would like to use that time to, after their presentations, set about 5 minutes to, open the floor a bit for questions from the group that would then seek to help clarify what the liaisons have presented. Is there something about the question that you didn't understand, or that a couple examples would help? We also recognize that in each of those lanes of questions of groups that we've identified for the working groups, there may be elements that we should consider that we didn't, and there'll be ideas on how to upgrade the work stream in that. You know, the CSRIC is chartered for 2 years. It goes through March 2017. I don't think everything we're going to describe today will necessarily be what we'd want the group working on a year from now. Those ideas on how to upgrade or potentially tee up for work stream throughout that 2-year period, would really love for those to come after the meeting. I think we could, we'll definitely get off our schedule if we are exploring things in addition to the questions. But we don't want to not hear those. I would ask that you funnel those through the FCC liaisons, to Teresa, who has been amazing, by the way, in helping to organize for this CSRIC. Thank you. And CC Jeff as well, so that we can then tee those up for the larger group and put those in the right context. So clarify and illuminate the questions today. Second, we'd like to ask you to seriously consider the expertise and knowledge of the members that are part of this CSRIC. As the chairman alluded to, we've taken steps to bring in a little more cyber bona fide into the membership. We've got amazing representatives from public safety, from our federal partners. I see Damon Penn over there from our FEMA DHS group, from industry providers, from vendors. So there's a mix of talents. We're going to need working group chairs, and we purposely did not select those prior to this meeting because we really would like to hear from you. We would like to have folks step up or nominate another. So be thinking about that as we go through this. I also want you to think about the talent base in response to the questions, in that we're not constrained to the members. The working groups can request subject matter expertise to provide presentations to the individual working groups. So do think about if you need an expert on information sharing down to the level of detail of what sticks in taxi protocol. Groups should be empowered to bring the right subject matter expert into that discussion. They're not voting members. They don't have all the rights and privileges that you all have. A lot of rights and privileges. They think there's pay. No, there's not pay.
No, there's no pay.
But we want you to bring the right expertise. And finally, let me end with it is a 2-year charter that we will, over the course of this, want to pace ourselves. We can't tackle it all at once, but we also know that there'll be things that pop up that have a real national imperative, that have a market imperative for us to address. So throughout this, we want to ask for your advice in that. So looking forward to your vigor and resolve that has been shown so ably in prior CSRICs, and we're looking forward to getting on with these tasks.
Thank you, Admiral Simpson, for framing our day and largely spending most of our time around introducing the working groups and illuminating, discussing, and clarifying for 5 minutes or so afterward, and then how we might have follow-up. So thank you very much for that. I'd like to share a few opening comments as well. It's my pleasure as well to welcome all of you here today. The council members, esteemed industry colleagues, leaders from the state, local, and federal governments, and the FCC federal leadership. We have a full and outstanding representation from all aspects of private and public sector communications. It's my privilege to have been appointed by Chairman Wheeler to preside over the inaugural launch of the next chapter of the Communications, Security, Reliability, and Interoperability Council, CSRIC 5. As you all know, the mission of CSRIC is to provide guidance, expertise, and recommendations to the Commission to improve the security, reliability, and interoperability of the nation's communication system. Ever since the early days of the Network Reliability Council, we have shown how the public and private sectors can come together to create important innovations, such as the evolving E911 services, alerting services, and infrastructure resiliency, as well as deal with aspects of cyber threat vectors. Not too many times in our careers do we have the opportunity to shape an industry. And so I expect this experience will be rewarding and a fruitful one for all of us. I would like to thank the council members for giving their time, expertise, and I commend Admiral Simpson and his staff who worked very hard and diligently to quickly charter CSRIC 5 in just 3 short months and have what might be one of the only first June meetings that I know of. I look forward to working with all of you over the next couple of years. I'd like to suggest at this point that we go around the room for introductions. If each council member could introduce him or herself and the company or organization they represent. We'll start on my right and go around clockwise. Teresa.
Teresa Hennessy, Comcast.
Good afternoon. I'm Lori Flaherty with the National 911 Program at the U.S. Department of Transportation.
We shouldn't pass over Suzanne. Suzanne Cameron has taken.
Council members. So.
I know. I'm just going to. I'm remiss. Suzanne has replaced Lauren. Those of you who know Lauren Kravitz as the counterpart to Teresa, and will help us in the facilitation of the meeting. Thank you, Suzanne.
Hello, I'm Sam Matheny with the National Association of Broadcasters.
Good afternoon. My name is Scott Weber. I'm the Executive Vice President of Network Operations for Charter Communications.
My name is Craig Donaldson. I'm a Senior Vice President for Intrado Communications.
Hello, I'm Kim Keever, and I represent Cox Communications.
Brian Doan, Department of Homeland Security.
Mike Brown, RSA Security.
Tim Lorello, Telecommunications Systems, standing in for Maurice B. Touze, our CEO, who's on the panel.
Rod Rasmussen, President and CTO of IID.
Rodney Jaffe and Newstall.
Good afternoon. Sean Wilson with VeriSign, sitting in for Danny McPherson, our CSO.
Andy Ellis, Chief Security Officer for Akamai Technologies.
Donna Bethea-Murphy, Senior Vice President, Global Regulatory for Inmarsat.
Jeff England, Chief Financial Officer, Silver Star Communications. We're a rural broadband provider in western Wyoming.
Good afternoon. Steve Sounder, the Director of Public Safety Communications, or the 911 Center for Fairfax County, Virginia. And now that I have my first hash mark from having served on CSRIC number 4. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Joel Molinoff. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for CBS.
My name is Alexander Gerlnich. I'm with EchoStar, and I'm stepping in today for Jennifer Manor. Thank you.
Richard Perlotta from the Shadow Server Foundation.
I'm Kent Bressie with Harris, Wiltshire, and Grannis, but I'm here in my capacity as counsel for the North American Submarine Cable Association.
Good afternoon. Robert Mayer, Vice President with the U.S. Telecommunications Association.
Good afternoon. Sean Spivey, Assistant General Counsel for Competitive Carriers Association, and I'm sitting in for Brad Blanken, who's our Vice President of Industry Development.
Hi, I'm Dana Golub. I'm here with PBS.
Hi, I'm Kyle Malady. I'm with Verizon.
I'm Wayne Pacine with the Federal Reserve Board of Governors.
Cheryl Greathouse with APCO International.
Damon Penn with FEMA.
Susan Miller, the President and CEO of ATIS, the Alliance for Telecommunications Industry Solutions.
I'm Brian Joseph with CTIA, the Wireless Association.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tom Hickey. I'm the Chief Legal Officer of Iridium Satellite.
Jonathan Powell, Vice President of Telecommunications with Cherokee Nation Industries.
Howard Brown with Tulare Data Services, a department of the Tulare Tribes of Washington State.
Good afternoon. My name is Willie King. I'm the CTO at the Communication Services for the Deaf.
Francisco Sanchez with the Harris County Office of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. Like Steve, I'm here for the second round. Inevitably get asked where Harris County is. If the astronaut had only said
Harris County, the Eagle has landed, that would make my life easier.
Thank you, everyone in the room. And those that are new, fear not for those that are claiming the stripe for CSRIC 4. This one's going to be fun. I think we have some council members on the phone as well. So if we could have you introduce yourself, and we'll try to work through a collision if it happens.
Hi, Tony Cole, Vice President and Global Government Chief Technology Officer at FireEye.
Hello, this is Brooks Fitzsimmons from AT&T, Assistant Vice President, National Security and Network Regulatory.
Good afternoon. This is Bill Check, CTO of the National Cable and Telecommunications Association.
Good afternoon. Mark Annis, City of Riverside, California, Office of Emergency Management and the Riverside Urban Area Security Initiative.
Kathy Whitbeck representing Jim Leno at Insight Communications.
Bill Bonney,
Pat Roberts.
Mobile, CISO.
Pat Roberts of the Florida Association of Broadcasters.
This is John Thomas. Smith, Director of Engineering, Cherry Creek Radio.
This is John Thomas, sitting in for Joe Meyer, Vice President, Service Assurance, Sprint.
Rao Vasireddy, Alcatel-Lucent, representing TIA.
Tim Walden, Senior Vice President, Engineering Construction at CenturyLink.
Bill Smith, Security Advisor, PayPal.
Sounds like everyone on the phone. Thank you very much for being with us today on the phone. That was pretty well done with almost no collisions, so I'm impressed. Well done. I hope that all of you can join us on September 23rd, so that's really the next meeting for anyone in the room or on the phone. To the degree you can be here, that'd be fantastic. So the next item on our agenda is to introduce the explanation of the working group. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff.
Well, we're going to do Paula first.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah, so Paula is from our Office of General Counsel, and there are a certain amount of legal procedures that we need to follow here and guidelines, and so we think it very appropriate to have Paula help explain those to us. Let me take this opportunity to thank our OGC. They're amazing here. They are all about how do we get to yes. So Paula, thanks for being part of that getting to yes.
Thanks. I like to think of this as a little primer so that when you come up with great actionable recommendations, we can actually use them, and we haven't tripped over any of the many little FACA steps that sometimes impose hurdles. So I'll just give a little background on the Advisory Committee Act that we have to follow, and the principles which I think you're all familiar with, even if you've not done this before, are openness in government, diverse and balanced membership, which is definitely satisfied by this group, and public accountability. So I'll just go through some of the rudimentary steps. The first is that our parent committee meetings that we're having, the first of which today, have to be publicly noticed in the Federal Register with at least 15 days notice. In case of emergencies, we can come up with an explanation of why it can be done in less notice. I just mentioned this, that if something comes up and one of you feel that you really want to assemble a meeting on something that looks really urgent on cybersecurity or something else, to explain why, apart from the logistics of finding a date that's good for everyone, we can't always just do something the next day, because we have to assemble the membership and we have to publish notices, and there's usually at least a 2-week turnaround to do all of that. It doesn't mean we can't try to do things impromptu, but typically the statute requires a 15-day notice. The documents that and the meetings need to be open. The meetings are the full group. Since you will be discussing cybersecurity matters, potentially there could be things that you don't want the entire world to know. If any of you are aware of something that you would like to discuss at the open meeting that raises national security concerns, trade secrets, other things that are really, really sensitive, let Jeff or Suzanne know. There is an ability to close portions of meetings, but we can't do it spur of the minute. It would have to be sanctioned in advance by both the General Counsel's office and the Chairman's office. So if you see that coming, don't wait till the last minute to mention it, because it also would have to be stated in the Federal Register notice that part of the meeting will be closed. Or it could be the whole meeting. I mean, that has happened before. But just talk to Jeff and Suzanne about that in advance, please. Similarly, documents that are introduced at the meetings or that come before working groups are typically required to be available for public inspection. Same caveat with that. If you anticipate something that you will be discussing at the working groups, especially in writing, things you're going to be sharing that you think should be confidential or could raise trade secrets or are otherwise sensitive, let your working group liaison know, and it's possible to submit things under an FCC confidentiality request, or if there's something you want to discuss with the group that your company is willing to discuss with others on the group, but doesn't want that information to go any further, you can also exercise non-disclosure agreements that your companies would get in place. I mean, I know that this is not so much an issue for some of our other FACAs, but I could see that being a practical concern here, where things could be sensitive that you're discussing. So that's another thing to keep in mind, because if you're going to do non-disclosure agreements with each other and just agree to keep the sharing limited, those would have to, we would help review them in the General Counsel's office, but your own counsel would want to review them as well. So that would be something that would be a little time consuming. On the role of your designated federal officer, everything runs through the DFO, which in this case is Jeff or Suzanne. Jeff would call the meetings. Jeff, the designated federal officer, approves all the agendas. And while it's nice to discuss last-minute things at meetings, we have that little problem of the Federal Register notice, which sets forth what we'll be discussing. So due to that requirement, we can discuss a natural outgrowth of something at the meetings, but we typically could not just move on to some new topic that wasn't publicly announced. So again, when the agendas are coming up, when you're thinking of meetings, you could coordinate with John as well. Just make sure that things that you folks think should be discussed at the meeting are communicated to John and to Jeff so they actually get on the meeting notice. Again, this is just so that we don't trip up over VACA rules. For documents, if you have a document that you want to share that hasn't been discussed at a working group meeting, but you just think would be great, some article, for example, that you think would be topical, that you want to share with people, you can send that in to John and Jeff, and they can review it in advance, and then it'll become part of the record if they think it's appropriate, and they would be responsible then for distributing it to everyone else. But the channel of communication should be through your chair and through the DFO, as opposed to you're just sort of blasting something, to everybody. This way we have a screening process and no one gets too overburdened with, extraneous material. Another topic is the working groups, and I just wanted, and this is where things can really get tripped up, so I just wanted to give the ground rules on the working groups. The working groups will be less than a quorum, and that means that the meetings can be closed, and typically are closed. At the meetings, if you find that there's some particular topic where you folks know that there's an expert or someone who feels strongly about something and wants to give a presentation, that is fine. That person you can invite, check with your liaison, but typically you can invite that person in to speak to your closed working group, to answer questions, etc. And then, in the typical case, the person is nicely escorted out of the room if what you're having is a closed meeting. But that is inviting people in for their expertise is another way short of membership to get the information and input that you need to do your job, just a practical approach. As I said, working groups tend to be less than a quorum. And the major thing that a working group should do is come up with recommendations that then go to you guys as the full parent VACA. And you would debate those recommendations, vote on them, modify them, whatever. What cannot happen, and where occasionally people get tripped up, is the working group cannot send its recommendations directly to Chairman Wheeler or to the FCC, because the working group is simply an arm of the full committee. And if the working group starts acting and directly interfacing with the voting members of the commission, then the working group has sort of converted itself into a parent VAC. And the problem with that is the working group has been operating in private, which would be contrary to the directives of the Federal Advisory Committee Act. So just remember that as a working group, it's great. You come up with your recommendations, then they come up to the parent committee for the open meeting and to be fully debated and sorted through and accepted or modified. So that's a pretty key thing. The other thing I wanted to mention, because it has happened once or twice over the past couple of years, is that occasionally, because all of you are, or many of you are leaders in your field, and you might be writing op-ed pieces in the newspaper about things that the committee's working on, it's come to pass that people have written really good op-ed pieces, and then they've signed them as, John Chance, Comcast Cable, head of the CSRIC. And by accident, it will make it look as though, in that case, John's opinions were the opinions of the full CSRIC and things had been voted. So that would not be, unless it were the case that they had been voted and John was simply doing an op-ed piece reporting on your work, essentially it would make it look as though John's personal opinions were the opinions of all of you. So it's fine to mention as part of credentials that you serve on the CSRIC, but it's very important that when you're discussing the personal opinions, you make that clear in whatever the op-ed piece is or your speaking engagement or whatever, that you're speaking for your individual views and not trying to represent an opinion of the FCC or the full CSRIC, et cetera. I mean, this can happen by accident, and so it has happened. So I just wanted to highlight that. I think that is about it. Does anyone have any questions at this point? Okay.
I promised Paula not to write any op-eds without the whole group knowing about it, but thank you. Any questions for Paula from the phone?
Thanks very much.
Paula, thank you very much. So now I'll turn it over to Jeff to introduce explanation of our working groups for CSRIC 5.
Okay, thanks, John. Usually, by the time we have our first meeting of CSRIC or an NRIC, we have the working groups not only fully defined, but we have the descriptions written. We have a document that has descriptions in some length. It's usually posted on the website. You'd be able to look at it by now. It's not there for this advisory committee yet. The document exists. We've given a lot of thought to the working groups, and we know what we want to ask them. So that kind of thinking has been done, but we have not had a chance to introduce you to what those questions are. And we will be doing that soon. The working group description document will find its way onto the website soon, and you'll be able to see it just as you have in the past. But we wanted to use this first meeting in a way that we have never done before, and that is to have the liaisons to the various working groups spend some time and describe to you, introduce to you what the working groups are being asked to do, what questions we have for them, and then to give you an opportunity to ask clarifying questions. As Dave was saying before, we're not looking to necessarily sort of question the question. If you've got ideas for how to add to what we're asking, things that we hadn't thought of, either today or later, those can come up. And as Dave said, too, we're not going to have enough time today to get into all those things. But what we will do is I will send out an email after this meeting with email addresses for all the liaisons. So if you've got questions on a particular working group that's described today, I'd ask that you send them an email, and we will just compile that list, and we will deal with those questions. We'll get back to you. So that's how we'd like to do this today.
And any emails they send to liaison,
yes.
Copy you, me, John, Teresa.
Yes. Any emails that you send to the liaison should also go to Teresa and I and to Suzanne. And I'll include all those emails in the list. Thanks, Suzanne.
And Jeff, if I could recommend, even if there were other matters, as Paula discussed, about agenda items you'd like to be considered, or questions you might have, that we copy the three of us, so that we make sure if someone's on vacation or something, it doesn't fall into the cracks.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So why don't we start? And the first working group, and this is going to look a little bit familiar to Working Group 4, but we have a working group on evolving 911 services. The liaisons for that working group are Tim May and John Healy. And yes, they're both here today.
Thank you, Jeff, and good afternoon, members. I'm Tim May. I'm in the Public Safety Homeland Security Bureau Policy and Licensing Division. I'm the NG911 Projects Manager. And I'm joined by John.
I'm John Healy, and you're going to be very fortunate today. I'm not going to do any of the talking.
John is our Director of Standards. So I'm going to get right to it. So advancements in wireless devices, both operating systems and application platforms, and the wide-scale deployment of advanced licensed and unlicensed wireless networks have led to the rapid deployment of commercial location-based services. Now, as many of us know, these commercial services rely on fairly accurate coordinate-based location. Now, in the 911 realm, when a 911 call is initiated, the first task is to determine the PSAP to which the 911 call should be routed. Wireless service providers and the PSAPs rely principally on cell and sector routing, specifically the location of the cell site and the sector in which the call has originated. Now, cell and sector coverage areas can cover more than one jurisdiction, so this can lead to unnecessary transfers of calls between PSAPs, which in turn may slow emergency response times. But location-based routing relies on the actual location of the calling device, and thus may offer the ability to more quickly and accurately route 911 calls to the correct PSAP. Therefore, Working Group 1 will study and make recommendations on the architectural, technical, operational, cybersecurity, and standards requirements of location-based routing that uses longitude and latitude information, when available, to route the call to the nearest appropriate PSAP. In particular, we're asking the working group to explore and report on the transition path to location-based routing of 911 calls on legacy and hybrid next-generation 911 systems, in particular identifying the necessary roles and responsibilities of key stakeholders involved in supporting the 911 call. And with that, I will take your questions.
One additional piece. So when Tim described operational mitigation steps, we're also looking from the public safety representatives for how PSAPs might mitigate misroutes as they occur. So we'd like to also look at, are there things the FCC should consider with regard to encouraging PSAPs, for example, to ensure that their GIS, their maps, are common across the borders of that jurisdiction, so that when a misroute does occur, there's less negative impact from the misroute because the two counties can effectively and efficiently pass the call on because they both see it in the same context. So we also would like to have the working group explore operational mitigations.
Brian Joseph.
Thank you, and I certainly applaud the explanation of the group and the focus on the routing issue. And I guess the one question for consideration that I would put out there, as the FCC is well aware, they recently took steps with regard to location accuracy of callers and enhancing the location accuracy. Just would want to make sure that this working group takes into account, those efforts. While this is focused on, tightening the routing, wouldn't want to see some contradictory recommendations that come out. And while not prejudging, any of the work that this working group would be engaged in, I think just a factor for the working group's consideration.
Yeah, Brian, that's great input. We want to be crisp about this. We don't want to drift into discussions around Phase 2. The recent order that we passed with the help of all the stakeholders in that area, we think it's put us on a really good path for the Phase 2 piece of indoor location accuracy and improving Phase 2 more generally. So our focus area really is around the Phase 1, around that routing decision. Yeah, Tim,
I think, again, and this is the type of qualification that will happen as the working group, when they gather, they're going to cut to the chase. They're going to drill down on the specific set of issues that they're going to look at, and the recommendations will flow from them.
Great. Thank you.
So in the way of flow, for people in the room, if you could turn your 10 cards on the side if you have a question. Tim, I'll be to you next here. And for those on the phone, we'll go to the phone after we exhaust the room, at least within the time we have today.
Thank you, John. Yeah, I'm just sort of following up on Brian's point. You did mention latitude, longitude as you were thinking about LBS-based routing. One of the things that we've been doing, of course, with Voice over IP for a long time now is using the registered location, which is actually dispatchable location, which is, I think, back to what Brian was alluding to. We're using that for routing purposes has sort of been very close to what you've been talking about with regards to LBS routing. So as you look at this, hopefully it's not just about latitude, longitude, but it's about some of these other elements. If you want to comment.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, great. And the second thing is, as Admiral Sisson expanded the view of what we want to look at from the PSAP perspective, it's important also to look at what ESI nets are doing today. We are not doing, when an ESI net is involved, there's oftentimes going to be a secondary routing consideration that the ESI net itself takes into account, which might do a better job than what the originating service provider was able to provide, at least at the stage in which routing was originally requested. So I would just also encourage that as well.
Yes, that's actually an excellent point. And we expect that the team actually is going to look at ESI nets too.
Okay, I don't see any other questions in the room. How about anyone from the phone who's on the council?
As many of you know, back in January of this year, the Commission established a task force that was titled on Optimal PSAP Architecture. There are going to be reports beginning to come out in the latter part of July and then again in the latter part of September from those three working groups. I would imagine that there's going to be content within those recommendations and so forth, and that body of work that this working group can benefit from and maybe leverage here.
Don't worry, we are going to be very cognizant of those reports, and we will make sure that those reports factor into this particular working group.
Okay, so if there aren't any questions on the phone, thank you, Tim and John. We much appreciate that, and it sounds like a few other work products that will be considered and incorporated. Jeff, for Working Group 2?
Yep. For Working Group 2 is emergency alerting platforms. And the liaisons for that group are Chris Anderson, James Wiley, and Greg Cook.
Hello, members. My name is James Wiley. I'm an attorney advisor for the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau's Policy and Licensing Division, joined by my colleagues Greg Cook, Chris Anderson. I'll also be liaisons to Working Group 2. State and local emergency managers often have the best situational awareness about emergencies that are inherently local. Yet, despite this somewhat commonsensical proposition, more could be done to empower state and local emergency managers to share time-critical emergency information with the public. It's the task of Working Group 2 to consider methods to empower state and local emergency managers to leverage new and emerging technologies to improve emergency alerting platforms. Technological developments have allowed emergency alerting platforms to become even more powerful tools for alert originators, thanks in part to voluntary efforts undertaken by commercial mobile service providers and other industry representatives. CSRIC 5 Working Group 2 is tasked with providing recommendations to the Commission on how to encourage the use of emergency alerts by state and local emergency managers at a local and geo-targeted level, included by providing alerts and information flow on a one-to-many and a many-to-one basis, and on providing recommendations on technical issues, such as how public safety officials can leverage various emergency alerting platforms, including social media, to best alert the public of developing emergency situations, while also enabling the public to share information back with emergency managers. The working group is also tasked with addressing the issue of how to coordinate multiple alerting platforms, as well as the development of best practices and standards that could result in improvements to public safety outcomes. In order to do this, the working group must also address how to make sure that these emergency alerting platforms continue to be resilient, reliable, and secure. The working group will review WIA security practices and recommend any actions, including the development of best practices, that the Commission should take to improve WIA security. Such review and recommendation shall include an examination of how the integrity of the C interface can be protected, how to protect against the exploitation of vulnerabilities in alert origination networks, and how WIA message data can be protected in transit and at rest. In this regard, the working group should also take into consideration new and evolving technologies that may reduce cyber risk to WIA networks and services. With that, I'll take any questions from the group.
Brian?
Thank you, and certainly appreciated your work and your direction and guidance on the CSRIC 4 emergency alerting. I commend the focus of this working group. I think that certainly addressing the security, we had touched on that in the CSRIC 4, didn't get as far as I think we all wanted to go, so I'm very encouraged and excited about that. When I heard your description of addressing exploitation of vulnerabilities in the alert origination networks, is the thinking so I agree with it on the C interface. Is your thinking that in the state and local emergency management offices, ensuring that there are the adequate security protections in place on that end as well? Was that the intention?
Admiral Simpson, is that what you'd like to handle?
Yeah. Yes, we don't want to presume that handling that on the carrier side or handling that on the emergency manager side is a better way to go about it. And frankly, there's probably utility in actions generated on both sides to reduce the likelihood of a malicious cyber effect in that area. So both sides.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I would agree. Certainly, the end-to-end review is important.
Yeah, and in particular now, one of the things that we're asking is the one-to-many, but that many back to one is something we haven't really thought of before in alerting, right? That alerting might also contribute to a more efficient and effective way of rapidly polling the affected set of consumers within a particular disaster area so that they can provide feedback on the disaster in a manner that's efficient for the Emergency Operations Center or the PSAP or whatever, where the origination comes from. So that would potentially expose additional threat factors as we look at the ability to include a hyperlink, let's say, that would facilitate that efficient feedback.
Sure. Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Question?
Just one question. One, I appreciate looking at the one-to-many and many-to-one because that's really that's really changed the dynamic in terms of how that. Well, now that we live in the world of ones and zeros in the past 5 or 6 years, that's a challenge to emergency managers. To just clarify a little bit on encouraging emergency management to use these multiple channels, whether it is social media or wireless emergency alerts, other mass notification systems, traditional media. Are you looking at exploring all those individually, or sort of also the process of how maybe we, instead of 6 or 7 steps, how we integrate those and potentially making WIA a part of all that? Is that?
Yeah. I think the answer is yes and yes.
Instead of pressing one or two buttons as opposed to 7.
Yeah, so the operational challenge I think we're trying to get after is what I hear from many PSAPs and other emergency operations centers, that there's a velocity of communications to impacted public from an emergency or disaster that we're just losing the war on, that social media is out ahead of the authoritative information source in many crises. And so we'd like to explore how we even that back up and have the authoritative status around a crisis compete with that velocity and maybe even be ahead of that velocity of non-authoritative information sources around a crisis. Does that provide the right kind of strategic goal?
That does.
Yeah. Great. Thanks.
Other questions in the room? How about the phone? Any questions from the phone? Okay, thank you, Chris, James, and Greg. Thank you very much.
I think Chris has the second. Oh, it's just James. Oh, great. Yeah. So good. Thanks.
Great.
And the next group is the emergency alerting system. Greg Cook will return to do that one.
Thank you. And welcome, everybody. Thank you. Thank you all very, very much for participating. As I think you all know, the emergency alert system has had working groups, active working groups in CSRIC for many, many years. And many of you have worked on those working groups, and as you know, we've made a significant amount of progress as we've helped evolve the emergency alert system from a fairly siloed, broadcast-oriented system into one that is becoming more integrated with all of the communication system as they evolve into this new digital and internet-based world. This working group has 3 discrete objectives. First, we are going to look at coming up with recommendations to facilitate the adoption of the EAS cybersecurity guidelines that were adopted by the CSRIC 3.
The implementation.
To facilitate the implementation. Thank you.
We don't want to redo CSRIC 4's work on what the right aim point is for EAS security.
No.
That was great work.
Yeah.
We now want to ask you to help us figure out how we facilitate the implementation of that. Yeah.
Okay. And then the second recommendation is to recommendations for how we can deliver, how the EAS can deliver its alerts in languages other than English. And then the final recommendation is to create a new EAS handbook. And I'm going to briefly review each of these, and if we could save all the questions on all of them for the end, I think that would probably be the most efficient. First, let's talk about EAS security. There's a lot of history here, and as all of you remember, in 2013, the EAS was hacked, the famous zombie alert. And that was largely made possible by a lack of primary cyber hygiene and best practices among those affected. In response to the event, the CSRIC 3 and 4 recommended EAS cybersecurity industry best practices, and the Commission issued a public notice that sought comment on the response to those, how they were adopted, who was adopting them, what the practices were. And the Commission, the Bureau is very seriously considering a further rulemaking in the EAS area, and to discuss how we would implement and further develop these best practices, and the response to the public notice has not really been sufficient to allow us to develop that record. And so what the purpose of this working group will be to assess any barriers to the adoption of these best practices and to make recommendations on incentives, both regulatory and non-regulatory, for methods by which other EAS stakeholders may gain assurance that these best practices are being being implemented. So what we're really looking for is not to redo the best practices. They're done, and as Admiral Simpson said, they're very good. They're a really good piece of work. What we're looking for is we need to see, why haven't we heard from people? What can we do to hear from people? What barriers to these adoptions exist, and how we can address these barriers? That is the first one. And we would like to see if this is a recommendation that could be presented early, ideally at the September meeting, so that it could coincide and fit ideally into the record that the Commission would be developing for this forthcoming rulemaking, if in fact it arrives before the Commission. That is the ES security guideline. The second one is multilingual emergency alerts. Now, the Commission, as I think the Chairman made very clear, is committed to preserving the life and the property and the public safety of all Americans, notwithstanding whatever languages they may speak. And having English as a primary language should not be a predicate to receiving emergency alerts. This working group will recommend best practices for the delivery of multilingual and emergency information, and the palette here, I think, will be really quite wide, looking all the way from how communities may address the needs of their citizens. I know, for example, there are at least one radio station where they have a phone tree of Arabic-speaking folks who can be there on the spot to translate alerts. Okay. On the other hand, we know that at least one of the emergency alert manufacturers is introducing equipment that can translate on the fly. So we're looking at that wide spectrum of information, from how communities address the needs to how these needs can be addressed in purely technical fashion. And so we are going to be looking to this working group to pay particular attention to how communities determine the needs of their citizens, and how individual EAS participants, whether broadcasters, cable providers, DBS providers, or whomever, set up their systems to address these needs. I want to make a very careful distinction that this is not talking about EAS participants initiating alerts. That's primarily a government responsibility. But nonetheless, they all have, whether it is through their license or through their franchise agreements, all EAS participants have community roles, and what we're looking is to see how they address these community roles by trying to get the alerts to all of their communities.
Yeah, and Greg, we believe that the states have a real potential role in this. So we would encourage the NASBA, the National Association of Broadcast Administrators, from the states to add expertise to this, and we really think that this is we want to bring alive a state and local focus to this.
Yes, absolutely. So whether it's NASBA, whether it's the SECCs, we really are looking for that kind of state analysis of what is of what their multilingual needs are. The final one is a very discrete project, and it's one that's been around for a long time, and I've been hearing from a lot of SECs about this. As you may know, Part 11 requires that every EAS participant have that EAS handbook on hand, so that if anything happens, they can flip open and learn exactly how to behave in a particular instance. And we have handbooks out for broadcasters, handbooks out for radio, handbooks out for cable providers. I would say, by and large, these are old, they are obsolete, they do not contain the most accurate and the most up-to-date information. And when we actually needed one, most recently for the 2011 nationwide test, we had to write a completely new one that was dedicated to that. And I think that will serve as a pretty good jumping-off place for what the work of this working group will be, which is to create the new handbook. We're seeing EAS evolve. We're seeing it integrate with other systems such as wireless emergency alerts. We're seeing two distinct ways of delivering EAS, whether it's through the broadcast daisy chain or through the common alerting protocol. So there are many ways that a particular entity might respond to it. Some of them may be purely automated in the case of a cable head end. Some might be 24/7, 365 live broadcast. We need to see how this document, this can become, rather than this thing that sits in the bottom of a drawer, that can become a dynamic tool that folks who are on hand when that alert is being delivered can use as either when that alert is being delivered or to be using as a training tool during tests. And in that regard, the working group would analyze the manner in which the EAS should operate and each type of EAS participant, and she'll make recommendations for both the textual and the visual elements of a handbook that is appropriate for each EAS participant, with, of course, particular attention, as similarly to the multilingual, to rural, smaller, and less resourced participants who might really need this document because they might not be familiar. Now, one thing I will add to this is that we're living in an online world. We are slowly beginning to take all of these individual pieces of paper that we've been using in EAS and bring them into really online tools that can be used in a dynamic fashion and become real valuable tools for the participant. That is an area for the handbook that should also be strongly considered. And now I'm open for questions.
So before we take any questions in the room, I'd just like to remind everyone on the phone, whenever you're not speaking, to please have your phone muted. We've gotten some feedback from a couple of participants. They hear noise that's overtaking the speakers in the room. So if I could ask everyone to do that, that'd be great. Questions in the room, please? You have a question?
Greg, inherent in the first four working groups, and I'm assuming inherent in your task number 2 that you just mentioned, was inclusion and discussion about the disabilities and the access and functional needs communities and how they are impacted by EAS and how we best serve them. So I'm assuming that's part of your function number 2.
I think the function number 2 really had been primarily for multilingual, but I think if we're talking about full access, as long as we can get that multilingual report in there and get some good data on that, expanding that to include some of the work, particularly like you were doing in the DAC last week, would be a valuable inclusion.
Thank you.
I don't see any other questions in the room. Anyone on the phone coming off mute who'd like to ask a question? Okay, thank you, Greg.
Thank you.
Next we have communications infrastructure resiliency. There's 2 subgroups that we've established for this working group. The first is submarine cable resiliency, and Mike Saperstein and Jerry Stanshine are the liaisons for that subgroup.
Good afternoon. I'm Mike Saperstein, an attorney advisor in the Public Safety Homeland Security Bureau, and I'll be co-liaisoning with Jerry.
And I'm co-liaisoning with Mike, I think.
And together we're going off the deep end to talk about submarine cables. So, just let it sink in.
I'd like to add for my friend Steve from the Coast Guard that's where the Navy works.
Yeah. So, submarine cables provide the majority of U.S. international connectivity and are significant domestic connectivity as well for certain U.S. states and territories. They're a national resource, and their resiliency is essential for U.S. economic and security interests. So recognizing this, in CSRIC 4, the working group recommended approaches for spatial separation of submarine cables and other infrastructure. And in order to further continue studying the resiliency of submarine cables, the Commission now seeks recommendations from the working group on 2 topics. The first is recommendations for enhancing coordination between and among federal, state, and local agencies without increasing regulatory burdens. And 2, recommendations for promoting geographic diversity of routes and landings. So first, regarding the topic of enhancing coordination amongst the governmental entities, the FCC seeks specific recommendations on what we as the FCC can do to better facilitate resiliency by changing the coordination modality. So for example, does the FCC need better coordination with the Coast Guard? And if so, tell us why, the recommended manner of coordination, and what we should accomplish with this coordination. If you're recommending that the FCC serve to increase coordination amongst other entities, be explicit. Tell us the nature of the problem, why it's necessary and appropriate for the FCC to be involved, as well as the specific recommendations on how the FCC should accomplish this coordination. For the topic of promoting geographic diversity of landing sites, we need to know if this is important for resiliency, and if so, why, and what, again, we as the FCC can do to encourage such resiliency via removing barriers to landing site diversity. The key to success for both reports from the working group is to have a laser focus on recommendations that the FCC can act upon with full explanations about why doing so will enhance submarine cable resilience. So we look forward to hearing from the working group about ways we can increase submarine cable resiliency, which is, as I stated, a critical national resource. So with that, I will take questions.
Questions from the room? No one else in the deep end in the room? Okay, we're going to head to the phone. Good.
I'd just like to recognize and thank Kent. He had the FCC team out on one of the cable laying ships in Baltimore Harbor. It was very useful for us and fascinating to see submarine cable from the 1800s alongside submarine cable that's laid today. So an important topic, and we're looking forward to it, Kent. But actionable. We want to get to actionable.
Okay, so Mike and Jerry, that's Working Group 4. Oh, Kent has a question. I'm sorry.
We very much enjoyed hosting you and your staff up there and appreciate the interest of the Commission and your Bureau in particular in these issues. I did have one question. I wasn't sure to ask it now, whether to ask it now or after the next subgroup of Working Group 4 outlines its work program or issues that it's going to address. But I was just curious to get a sense from the Bureau what the thinking is between the particular organization with subgroups, and maybe we're going to get into that later today about how that is going to work with the two different subgroups within Working Group 4.
I think that would be appropriate to work downstream. We'd want to have the chair of Working Group 4 participate with us in organizing how best to integrate the activities of the two subgroups, and whether or not we would have subgroup chairs as well. So I think it'd be better to defer that. Mike, would you agree?
Yes. Working Group chairs to be named before July 10th, which we'll talk about later.
Next subgroup is network timing, and the FCC liaison for that group is Eric Panka.
Kind of tough to follow that Abbott and Costello routine there, but I don't know. Didn't it get funnier as it went on? I don't know. I'm Eric Panketh. I'm the Chief of Operations and Emergency Management at the Public Safety Bureau, to talk a little bit about network timing. So just to sort of give the overview, precise synchronized network time is essential to pretty much the functioning of all communication systems. I think we all know that different parts of the communication sector have different timing needs, but what we want to do is sort of have a broader discussion across the entire sector about what are those timing needs for the communication sector. For the most part, the sector relies on the global positioning system to do synchronized and precise network time, and in pretty much every sector of the economy, we're heavily dependent on GPS. I'm a good federal employee. I carry at least 2 phones at any given point, so I have 2 GPS-enabled devices on me at all times. So you look at this room, there's probably hundreds of GPS receivers in here. Focusing on the sort of timing perspective, since GPS is so ubiquitous and it provides such accurate timing, there hasn't been a lot of work on, or not enough in terms of full-blown solutions on what could substitute for GPS as a network timing element. Now, certainly, like I said, the different types of requirements that each element of the communication sector have for timing, there might be solutions that would work. But the federal government is very interested in looking at alternatives or complements to GPS. So we're very interested in talking to the CSRIC here about what are some of the possible solutions. So, first of all, the questions we'd ask: what solutions would meet the timing precision requirements of the communication sector, and for what specific services within the sector? Are these solutions that are being proposed or that are being discussed right now, are they fully independent of GPS? Because some of the solutions still require GPS to do some synchronization. And so we want to look at building underlying resiliency in our national infrastructure by finding solutions that are independent of GPS. There's precision time protocol. The federal government's looking at LE-LORAN. We're very interested in thoughts from this group about what timing solutions exist and what could work for elements of the comm sector. And then, are there aspects of network infrastructure that have GPS receivers embedded into them, and can those pieces of equipment actually receive precision timing from other sources? So not just looking at, could I swap out a GPS receiver or include something else into the architecture of a comms network, but are there other parts of the infrastructure that have GPS so deeply embedded in them that a solution becomes difficult to achieve? So really, the high level is that we're looking for the sort of solutions that can provide network timing at the level that is necessary to run communications networks, and we're interested in CSRIC's thoughts on that.
Okay, questions in the room on Working Group 4, Subgroup B, as in Bravo. Okay, how about the phone? Questions from anyone on the phone, please?
Yes, hello, this is Brooks Fitzsimmons from AT&T. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Eric Panketh, thank you very much in terms of your description of the working group. A couple things I wanted to make sure that as we start framing this work effort we do is that I'm sure you're keenly aware of the work effort that Assistant Secretary Caitlin Durkovich is kicking off with the Department of Homeland Security. It's a cross-sectoral work effort from that perspective around GPS and timing reliance and dependency from that perspective. So I'd really like to make sure that as we scope this, that we also are making sure that we don't, conflict with that work effort, and that we're also cognizant of the fact that subject matter experts, for example, the ADIS Coast Sync Team, which is a copper optical access synchronization and transport committee, that the work effort they've already undertaken and have already initiated recommendations to the President and to the NSTAC subcommittee associated with it are all contemplated in terms of as we start doing this work effort. Put simply, I'd like to make sure that we avoid duplicative effort here, especially given the fact that these technical SMEs are, shall we say, in short supply. So thank you, Eric.
Brooks, thanks so much, and we very much want this to be complementary to the work that Assistant Secretary Durkovich has been pulling together. This is really about ensuring that that work and the need that created that work then is responsibly implemented and addressed within the communications sector. So we don't want to start from anew with good ideas with regard to that, but do want to see where we can ensure that the goals of that are met within this sector and remove any barriers to achieving that. We also want to look, there are business resiliency needs that go beyond the specific charter that DHS's work has been based on. So we want to make sure that the working group does have the latitude to look at, with the increased importance of timing, actually out where antennas are for 4G, LTE, and future protocols as speeds increase, that we want to make sure that this group looks at those dependencies through a communications value chain, which may be unique from the value chain for other sectors, and look at things like precision time protocol and other dissemination means that will actually help address availability. If we can get from 4 nines to 5 nines in an area because we've got more diverse availability of timing, we would like the group to consider that as well. So complementary to the DHS effort, but not excluded to that. We want to make sure that we're looking at what has a business value and therefore ultimately consumer value in this area.
Thank you, Admiral Simpson.
Any other questions from the phone? Okay, thank you, Eric.
Okay, we're halfway done. Working Group 5 is cybersecurity information sharing, and the liaisons from the FCC for that group are Greg Antosha and Vern Mosley.
So good afternoon, members. I'm Greg Antosha. I'm Special Counsel of Cybersecurity and Communications Reliability Division.
And I'm Vern Mosley. I'm a Senior Cybersecurity Engineer within that division.
So in the most general sense, Working Group 5 will be seeking to understand the most significant technical and legal barriers to cybersecurity information sharing within the communications sector in various contexts. Employing a bottom-up sharing perspective, the group will seek to understand the existing structures and processes in which cybersecurity information is shared between companies in the communications sector, and will be making recommendations to improve on these structures and processes. Effective sharing of cybersecurity information is an important tool for protecting information systems and their contents from unauthorized access by cyber criminals and other adversaries. This is a view that is expressed in a very recent report by the in the Cybersecurity and Information Sharing report that was released by Congressional Research Service, CRS. And there are various legislative proposals on cybersecurity information sharing that have been introduced into the 114th Congress. According to CRS, private sector entities often express reluctance to sharing cybersecurity information because of concerns of legal liability, antitrust violations, regulatory requirements, protection of intellectual property, and other proprietary business concerns. The CRS report concludes that the resistance to sharing of cybersecurity information amongst private sector entities might not be substantially reduced by the actions proposed by various legislation. Given the concerns that the cybersecurity information sharing will likely exist independent of the proposed legislation, the purpose of this CSRIC effort is to develop recommendations to the Commission to remove barriers and encourage sharing of cybersecurity information between companies within the communications sector. The cybersecurity information to be shared will include non-real-time threat indicators and warnings, real-time anomalous indicators, and post-incident information related to cyber attacks. So next I'll turn it over to Vernon Mosley, who will talk about how the group is organized.
Let me go ahead and a couple of things there. There's significant activity in Congress regarding the authorities and liabilities associated with sharing. We do not seek to at all replace that work. Similarly, DHS is doing great work on the information sharing and developing the concept of information sharing and analysis organizations. And if that's the top down, then the sweet spot we're looking to get recommendations in is the bottom up. How do we facilitate company-to-company information sharing, either between telcos, and we're really talking to small and mediums here very much. I think information sharing in the largest of companies There's pretty good information sharing challenges between divisions within some of the largest providers, but in the mediums and smalls, we really want to spend a lot of time there in this work stream and understand how we can help remove barriers in each of those categories. And it may be that one of the categories we're not going to be able to remove enough barriers to get any meaningful help to information sharing, but in another category, post-incident, boy, there's a lot we can do. So we want it complementary to the DHS effort and leverage from it, and we want to focus on that bottom-up, where's the sweet spot, and how can we facilitate trust pools, if you will, so that we get meaningful, useful information sharing that has business value for companies within the telecommunications sector. And that information sharing may not be limited to telcos. It may be, if we have a regional focus of this, the group may look at a small town that says, boy, the telco supporting 1,000 residences, sharing with the water company, sharing with the power company, sharing with the mayor's office, that would be an appropriate trust pool. So that's what the main effort we'd like to see from this group is that bottom-up removal of barriers to sharing.
What he said. So in order to develop these recommendations, Working Group 5 will organize into 4 study efforts. The first study effort will address use cases. The second, information sharing barriers and solutions. The third, optimal sharing trust pools. And the fourth, conduits for information sharing. The use cases study effort will document and or develop cybersecurity information sharing use cases that address the sharing of non-real-time threat indicators and warnings, real-time anomalous indicators, and post-incident information related to the cyber attack across the communications sector and trust pools. The identified use cases will be used to inform the work of the other study efforts to develop their recommendations. The information sharing barrier study effort will identify and assess perceived technical and legal impediments, so cyber threat information sharing, analyze potential solutions to the impediments, and develop recommendations to the FCC that would enable cybersecurity information to be broadly shared across the communications sector. Barriers and potential solutions will be examined in sharing cybersecurity information. Again, that's threat indicators and warnings, anomalous indicators, and post-incident information from private to other private entities. The third, the optimal sharing trust pool study effort will identify, assess, analyze, and develop recommendations for the appropriate size and composition of cybersecurity information sharing trust pools to encourage and enable the sharing of cybersecurity information to all stakeholders necessary to successfully execute the protect, detect, respond, and recovery functions of the NIST cybersecurity framework. This is an important facet of the CSRIC work, as we know there's a difference between information sharing and analysis amongst different size entities, that it will vary depending on the composition of these trust pools, and that one size does not fit all. This will be an opportunity for the CSRIC to address this important facet of cybersecurity information sharing. And the final study effort, Conduits for Information Sharing, will focus on identification and assessment of structures and platforms through which communication sector stakeholders can routinely share cybersecurity information within the constraints of existing law. Greg?
So we envision the working group in the 2-year term of CSRIC 5 will produce the following deliverables. Cybersecurity information sharing use cases in December 2015. Technical and legal barriers and solutions to cybersecurity information sharing, March 2016. Cybersecurity sharing trusted pools, September 2016. Cybersecurity information sharing platforms in December 2016. and the finalized recommendations for cybersecurity information sharing, March 2017. So in our effort to improve the flow of real-time cyber threat information, the FCC works in close partnership with the Department of Homeland Security, which takes the lead in information sharing for the government. The Commission views the CSRIC work on private sector cybersecurity information sharing as complementary to DHS efforts and critical to improving information sharing across the entire communications sector. So we look forward to working with the Council and the working groups, and we certainly appreciate your efforts.
So before we jump into the questions, I just want to compliment the Council. I think the questions thus far with adding clarification, and a lot of them, around other work threads, outside of CSRIC, whether it's DHS and other places, but we talked about evolving 911 series, network timing, and now cyber. And I think great clarification questions and great answers in terms of how our work in CSRIC 5 can be informed, by some of those other pieces of work. But they're meant to be complementary in the deliverables that we're all working on. So I'll turn it to the room here for questions. First question, Robert.
Thank you very much. Admiral, I appreciate your comments about the duplication, avoiding that, and the synergies and complementary nature of working with the DHS effort. One suggestion, minor, the deliverables, you mentioned technical and legal, but in the other conversation it seemed broader barriers. They may not just be technical and legal, so it would be helpful to consider not just limiting it to those two. The question I have is, to what extent do you anticipate that DHS might be involved in the effort, and also the Communications ISAC and the National Coordinating Center, since that is the current vehicle for the sector to share information?
So we are very hopeful that DHS will be a strong partner for us in this and resource for the group. The NCIC will certainly have a role that needs to be considered, but I would offer that because we're seeking to focus on the private-to-private sharing, there may be elements that the group feels that, boy, we'll never get useful sharing beyond a couple of companies right now, if in fact that is also burdened with additionally having to share that with the NCIC or the ISAC. But where there is private to government sharing, then we would expect that discussion to center completely around the NCIC, as well as consider the multi-state ISAC as having a role in there as well. But we'd like the primary focus to really be private to private, because we really think there is a number of other effective groups right now working on the government to private, and in our sector, we're looking to really make some progress, as the chairman said, actionable baby steps, if you will, in information sharing to, in particular, get some of our smalls and mediums to benefit from the defensive value of that information.
Thank you. Richard.
Yes. In listening through the descriptions of the different objectives and such, it seemed that there's a disconnect between what we think is necessary and what is actually already occurring. I'm not saying there aren't legal issues, there aren't barriers and things like that, but the reality is, at the layer we're sitting at this table, I think there's a lack of knowledge about what's actually happening in the world. So many of the things you're talking about having in these working groups are actually in place now. There are worldwide trust pools or groups. There is worldwide sharing of IOCs and incidents and information that occurs on a daily basis. Because I know where I work with personally, the security people at almost every organization sitting at this table on a daily basis sharing information between organizations. And so I think part of the barrier we need to ensure that is overcome is the barrier between the management and the government layer and those who are actually doing the work. because it actually is all happening. Everything you want to do is happening, whether you like it or not. And some of the work that's occurring that would horrify your lawyers. And that's because, in the end, we figured out a long time ago we have to get the work done. If we don't improve the environment that we all require, it's not going to get better. And so I want to make sure we recognize that there are a lot of existing efforts that are out there in this space already. And what we don't want to do is prevent them from continuing to do their job. And so as we create these new policies or new concepts, or even look at what laws or regulatory things are going to be put in place, we have to realize the work's being done now. You're already being saved every day, whether you like it or not. And so we need to make sure that that's in place as well as we go through these working groups, and we understand as we develop them and talk about them that we're actually involving those who are doing the work with what we're doing here.
Yeah, Richard, that's an excellent point, and we absolutely want to make sure that where capabilities exist, that those are a part of what the working group is anchoring their effort around to then get a better utilization, less variation across the sector, because we see lots of examples of great good news stories about companies that in the communication sector that are taking advantage of just what you described. But then we also see companies that are not involved in any meaningful information sharing, either through any kind of contract or agreement with other companies. So there's some normalization work that needs to go on. And a wise mentor of mine years ago taught me about the ABCs, and it's adopt, buy, create, and don't jump right to create. The right answer is adopt wherever you can, where there is existing capabilities, and then seek to improve upon those. So we want to do everything you said, ensure that the work of the working groups leverage that and use that as a starting point. But that we also recognize the second part of your point, which I think is very germane, which is that there needs to be a better education up channel within government of what is actually going on, so that we can get more focus on the things that continue to be barriers to effective sharing without wasting energy in areas where the problem really has answers today, and it's working pretty well.
And I would say that it's not just education to the government, it's education of the people sitting at this table. Right? There's a lot of CSOs and CEOs and C-levels and C-this that, also need to understand that efforts are on the way in their own corporations, whether they realize it or not most of the time. And you talk about the small organizations, the small to medium that you're also concerned about. And a lot of them are actually participating, but they don't always have the resources to give back. So many times they're a recipient of these things, but not necessarily a contributor. And it's not necessarily a barrier of money or politics or legal things. It's just a resource issue. Much so we saw the same thing with EAS, and we talked about doing the best practices, and that we looked at what is the burden that the end broadcasters are going to have to implement some of these things. It's the same thing about doing any kind of information sharing, is a lot of organizations just don't have the resources or the right people to do that. And so we need to make sure we're receptive also to have people who can participate as a recipient, but not necessarily as a contributor.
Yeah, very much. And I was at a industry association conference recently where we talked about this. And these are telcos that some of the telcos have 5 employees, at least one of the telcos, 5 employees. They serve 1,000 homes in a very rural area. When we started to talk about the trust pools, they said, at first their head was hurting. They said, boy, all these things associated with cybersecurity, Admiral, how could we possibly? We've got 5 employees. The chief marketing officer is the COO and is the CISO. And as we started to talk about trust pools, the light bulb came on, and one of them said, oh, wait a minute, maybe I don't need to have a CISO that just works for my company. Maybe 10 companies get together in a trust pool and have a cyber co-op and hire a CISO to support that co-op. So it's that kind of activity that we would expect to be discussed, and I think the working group can do a very good service is in the report out to the larger plenum to help point out best practices to facilitate how do we get more of that activity to be more normal across this sector.
Okay, looking around the room for other questions. We'll go to the phone. Any questions from the phone? Seems like it's Working Group 5. Thank you, Greg and Vern. Thank you.
Working Group 6 is secure hardware and software, and the liaison for Working Group 6 is Stephen McKinnon and Emily Tolaga.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephen McKinnon. I'm a cybersecurity engineer within the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau.
Hi, I'm Emily Tolaga, Chief Economist of Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau.
And so the focus of Working Group 6, our intent is to get a handle on security by design principles as a possible way to ensure network equipment offerings have some baked-in settings and features improving network security. As everyone in this room knows and has been a part of, there are emerging and even current security vulnerabilities in some of the software and hardware products that continue to impose some externalities and societal cost on end users. And addressing those security vulnerabilities in the design and development process can reduce the cost and the consequences of addressing security gaps once those products are in the marketplace and ultimately in the network. On top of that, the current industry shift towards more software-based technologies powering the infrastructure. Take software-defined networking as an example. With the promises that they hold, it's also highly possible that they could create a new set of vulnerabilities to communication networks in terms of suffering cyber attacks. And so our intent is to build on the recommendations presented at the Technological Advisory Council meeting this past December. During that meeting, the Cybersecurity Working Group developed recommendations for security practices to be considered in the design and development of core network equipment. And so Working Group 6 is expected to consider the practices available today in the various standard bodies such as 3GPP and even ADIS as templates for developing a set of relevant, robust, and applicable set of security best practices benefiting equipment suppliers, service providers, and the consumers who depend on these entities for secure and reliable communications. The goal of this working group, and ultimately one of the work products that comes out of this working group, will be to provide recommended security capabilities aimed at improving the security of the supply chain for networking equipment that comprises our core communications infrastructure. The Commission will be looking to Working Group 6 to recommend these security capabilities, making use of security by design principles applied throughout the design and development process of core network equipment. And to follow up on those recommendations, we also hope to secure a final report that will recommend voluntary mechanisms that can provide assurances both to the Commission and the public that the recommended security capabilities are being applied by the equipment suppliers. Hopefully, those mechanisms will live up to some of the actionable recommendations that the Chairman Wheeler stated as part of his desire for this particular council. So we feel this is a real opportunity to tackle a problem that I believe all of us have a vested interest in seeing handled. And so it certainly presents a chance to get a lot of different ideas and considerations out there and how these security capabilities can be implemented to better secure the core communications infrastructure. So I know that was fairly quick. I'll step to the side and take some questions.
Questions from in the room, please. Yes.
Hey, Stephen, thanks. I think I was following that up into the point about the supply chain. So can you expand on that piece a little more for me?
Sure. And I guess by the supply chain, you hear often about the particular risk and vulnerabilities that come within different parts of the supply chain that are involved in the design and development. So whether it's a foreign-based manufacturer that's handling your software coding or threats of a potential backdoors being inserted by a rogue manufacturer or some place like that, just to consider those risks that are present in the supply chain. What are the best ways to counter those risks when developing security features in the early part of the design and development process? Hopefully that makes a little more sense.
To add to that, I think one way to think about that is not only design and development, but also distribution, which is part of the supply chain piece, and that distribution would include the maintenance of products and software patches. So one of the things that might be explored by the working group is there a more effective way to reduce risk in the distribution of patches where perhaps the confidence level at lower levels within the supply chain isn't as high as in higher levels of the supply chain. Is there something that can be done looking at the operational aspects of how that's the patch updates are architected and then validated so that a hijack of patches from a lower level provider might not have a negative effect at scale across communications networks. So that's an example, and we would look to the working group to help define where the golden work is in that area.
Questions in the room? Yes, Richard.
I don't know if this is more for the Admiral or the assistants. Is the when you're looking at trying to secure the supply chain, and when you're looking at for comments and levels of methodology and stuff, at what level are you looking to defend at the criminal level or the state-sponsored level? Because obviously that's a wide range of capability differences, and we've already seen several different governments compromise the supply chain even at the delivery point, right, where they'll intercept in transit, make alterations to equipment, and manufacturers don't really have much capability to defend against those kinds of things, and so it's kind of a, what level are you really looking at to have comments on?
Yeah, so there's a range of threats, right, from nation-state actor down to criminal, all the way down to nuisance, and wise military leaders have communicated in the past that he who seeks to defend all defends nothing. So we do want to focus in on where we can reduce risk, where is there an achievable positive effect to be had in this area. In some of those areas across that spectrum of threat vector, there just might not be something that this group would be able to develop as a recommendation to guarantee that we'll never get an effect from that again. But there are a range of things that I think would be just helpful in general across the entire range and complicate the problem a bit more for adversaries. So we would look for one of the first tasks of the working group to help sharpen where the opportunities are, look at the report from the TAC, use that as a starting point, and then suggest where there's achievable fruit in this.
I think as a part of that, what needs to be included in there also is a study of the current steps that manufacturers are already taking, because due to state-sponsored and criminal activity that's already occurred in the last several years, a lot of manufacturers have altered their supply chain methodologies to try to defend against some of those things. And I think trying to capture some of that as one of your baselines would be very appropriate, because it might save you a lot of time in making recommendations, because you might be able to just take a recommendation that's already in place that someone's doing and go, yeah, that's probably within the range of what we think, what we should suggest, and if everyone else followed that idea, then it would be an improvement.
Yeah, it's a great example, a great point. And an example of that would be, and I'll just pick on routers. Routers in the past have generally been shipped with every single protocol supported by default. The passwords all set as password by default, and then it was incumbent upon the IT staff or the networking staff for a given enterprise or company to then apply the setup of that router so that you put it in a more secure configuration. It may be that one of the best practices that you alluded to would be for companies that say, you know what, I got a workforce challenge here. I've got some really bright guys in the headquarters area, but I'm shipping routers to areas I'd really like there to be a distribution with the exact opposite a setting. I want that router locked down as tight as can be, and if they think they needed a protocol opened, I'd like there to be that they've got to communicate with me, and I will authorize with the vendor the activation of that protocol. Those are the kinds of things that I would see bubbling up in that best practice of one vendor that could be shared with others that I think we benefit from in this area. And the goal is to better defend at scale. I don't think we're going to reinvent the wheel on some of the how to execute point defenses, but you all represent, or many of you represent, very large companies that have a real scale and distance problem, and I think that this group can really look at some ideas on how to better achieve that defense at scale.
Admiral, it sounds like you've logged into a router or two. Andy, how about you?
So it seems to me that there's three different classes of hazards that have just been bandied about here. There's one class which is what the title sounds like, which is the engineering hazards, right? We build software that is inherently vulnerable and not self-defending. One might think of the OpenSSL vulnerabilities as falling into that category. There's a category that's operations, which the Admiral just helpfully walked through, which is we have insecure by default settings and maybe people don't use them correctly. And there's a third category, which is the logistical hazards, which when we talk about supply chain is what I think jumps into mind. It might be helpful for us to understand which of these three or all of them you're pursuing. And if you are pursuing all three, to think about recommendations separated by those so that we don't derail ourselves by talking about logistical hazards when what you're really worried about might be an operational hazard.
Yeah, and I think this would best be done by the group itself, and it's one of the reasons why we're looking in this group. Well, some of the other groups were very laser focused on, tell us how to implement this thing. On this one, we really need a working group chair that's ready to start from the beginning with a big tent brainstorming. Let's get all the good ideas on the table, but then within 3 months, let's neck that down to some things that are actually achievable. And I could see that there would be elements in each of the three lanes that you described. There could also be, at the end of that 3 months, look, two of those lanes, just wouldn't be productive for this group, we're going to focus on that third lane. So that's what we're looking for. Okay. Thanks, Andy.
Good questions. Very good. Anybody on the phone want to ask a question? Okay. Thank you, Working Group 6.
Working Group 7 is cybersecurity workforce, and joining us on the conference bridge is Erica Olson, the liaison for that group.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
Yes, we can.
Great. My name is Erica Olson. I am joining you remotely from Connecticut today, so thank you for that. I am the senior legal counsel in the front office of the Bureau, and I wanted to talk with you briefly about Working Group 7, which is a cybersecurity workforce. Now, as you all are, I'm sure, aware, in the last CSRIC 4, Working Group 4, they did some really extraordinary work by taking a deep dive with the NIST cybersecurity framework as it applies to the various communication subsectors. But certainly in this environment today, we believe that a comprehensive view of cybersecurity is really incomplete without a close look at one of the more variable and challenging areas in the context, and that's the human factor. In this respect, we'll be asking CSRIC 5's Working Group 7 to look at this really important issue. We expect that the group would leverage existing work in this space, and particularly the cybersecurity workforce framework that was developed by the National Institute for Cybersecurity Education, or NICE, to examine ways to enhance both the volume and the quality of the cybersecurity workforce within the communication sector in particular. This, we think, would include the application of the NICE framework to this sector, identification of gaps in the framework, such as new or missing work roles, as well as the means to address accountability, transparency, and validation of knowledge, skills, and abilities, or KSAs, within the framework. We think this will also include best practices or other recommendations for the types of validated KSAs that the communications sector members should employ with respect to personnel who have access, particularly to the most critical elements of the nation's network infrastructure. It's our hope that the recommendations from this working group will provide the means to mitigate insider threats and to more ably ensure network security, not only for large corporations, but in a manner that is scalable to small and medium-sized contexts as well. In this respect, we also expect that the work of this working group will ultimately provide a security blueprint for all links of the chain, regardless of size or location, as well as providing a common lexicon and roadmap for industry to more effectively interface with educational institutions and job candidates, leading to better recruitment and retention of qualified cyber professionals within the existing workforce and directly from our 2-year, 4-year higher education and other training environments. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you folks in the room.
Questions in the room on Working Group 7? None in the room. Anybody on the phone have a question on this working group?
Amplification. So one of the things we want to do in this is first give companies more tools, but also help shift some of the training and education burden to the left before you hire people. And we think that the better we can describe the work roles that are needed in the companies represented within the communication sector, that product would then allow us to share that with colleges and community colleges and other training institutes, so that where today companies sometimes are having to really start with a lot of training for an education of their new hires in this space, because curriculum is oriented towards the federal need, because the federal got a jump start on this. The NICE framework was really from the federal government that said, hey, we really need a lot of cyber expertise within federal government. So that led to colleges across the nation orienting curriculum around the federal cyber need. We'd like to take a page out of that playbook and motivate a description of where those needs are common in the private sector, in the commercial sector for telecommunications, and where there may be work roles that, in addition to what exists today in the NICE framework, the communication companies would like to see, and/or particularly again in the small and mediums, where there are 38 work roles in the NICE cybersecurity workforce framework. That small company of 5 people, they're not going to be able to have 38 different people handle the 38 different cyber work roles, all the way from cyber forensics to the border protection and analytical analyst work roles. Is there a more appropriate grouping for small and mediums that is something less than 38 that would suggest, boy, we really need to focus on things associated with hygiene within the corporate structure itself, and look for the rest of the cyber skill sets to come through contracting of services or relationships with other providers. We really want to focus on moving some of that to the left.
So any questions from anyone on the phone? Just, between this working group and the previous one, 6, I'd just like to highlight an opportunity for the council members. As the working groups come together, there is opportunities in some of the subcommittees and things to bring in talented people you may be aware of who are not necessarily council members. So when we think of Work Group 7 that the Admiral just discussed, and we think about HR leaders or, talent development managers on some of these human factors, I'd encourage everyone on the council to just think about people in your company or people you might know. We'd like to have the best talent come and help work on these problems and bring the recommendations back to the FCC. Even in Work Group 6, which we talked about the 3 baskets that Andy highlighted, there's a number of work bodies that I know of in universities that are quite interesting that might be brought into this as a part of a subcommittee as well. So just a commercial break for that. Maybe we'll move to Working Group 8, Jeff.
Working Group 8 is Priority Services, and the liaison for that group is Eric Panketh, and this is the last working group that we have.
Hello again. So on Priority Services, want to look at basically the underlying communications assurance for first responders, public safety, and the national security community. Assured communications over commercial networks during a national emergency remains as essential today to responders and national security personnel as it did in decades past. However, commercial communications networks are increasingly relying on packet-based technology and retiring time division multiplexing TDM technology. The federal government, throughout this transition, will be losing capabilities. The Government Emergency Telecommunications Service, or GETS, relies on wireline TDM, and that will eventually be replaced by IP packet-based networks. The lack of priority communication services on packet-based systems could jeopardize national security or domestic incident response. And further, as advances in command and control focus increasingly on the transmission of rich data content, such as real-time streaming video, programs established by the government originally to ensure the availability and access to voice communications could take advantage of the additional capabilities that packet-based networks can provide. So we'd like the working group to assess how first responders and national security personnel can take advantage of packet-based technologies and recommend protocols or standards that can be used to provide assured communications upon retirement of TDM. And our intent is to help support first responders and national security personnel throughout the transition by getting input from the CSRIC on how these vital communication systems can maintain their capabilities with particular focus on GETS. They're potentially innovative solutions that can give first responders higher communications assurance when necessary to save lives, and we're looking to the CSRIC to provide recommendations in this area.
Questions in the room? Okay. Oh, there we go. Tim, yes.
Just real quick. Can you comment on how this will tie into FirstNet and some of the things that are going on already on this front?
Yeah, Tim, that's a great observation. We think it's very important for us to harmonize the work going on in FirstNet, which through the RFP and the ultimate contracts that are released will need to have prioritization schemas as part of FirstNet that include the identification, credentialing, access management associated with are you who you say you are, and then do you get that degree of prioritization in and around FirstNet? Because as we go forward, there will be a need for first responders to be communicating with others in and around emergencies and events, particularly the kind of national security emergencies that for which the prioritization programs were first envisioned. We believe that we wouldn't want to have two separate ways of handling prioritized communications for national security, federal agencies, and others involved in emergency response. So we would like the group to first study what FirstNet has already done in this area, be influenced by it, but then also potentially serve to influence FirstNet as they're still in the creation stage of that network. Right. Yeah.
Other questions in the room? Okay, how about questions from the phone?
Yes, hello, this is Brooks Fitzsimmons from AT&T. I have a quick question. As many of you are aware, obviously, carriers and ISPs are already engaged with the Office of Emergency Communications, the Department of Homeland Security, and the existing TDM technologies. Additionally, they are working in terms of contractually with that department and agency on new next-generation priority services that are, as Eric Panketh alluded to, packet-based. So just so I'm clear from a procedural standpoint, recognizing that this is a FACA, how do we, reconcile the contractual work efforts that are underway already with Department of Homeland Security, OEC, and then the advisory work that we're undertaking as related to this working group?
Yeah, Brooks, thanks for the question. We'll need to work very closely with DHS in that. We're in contact with the program office associated with that, and we'll be seeking to identify the line between which the contracting strategy that served us well in the TDM environment will continue to serve us well in the IP environment, where that ends in the packet-based environment, where you have a much larger potential set of providers. You all know better than any that to follow a packet through the nation's communication infrastructure, it's a patchwork quilt of providers, very different from the contract-oriented approach in TDM. So a key part of the work of this group will be to work with the DHS program office and Admiral Ron Hewitt and his guys and gals to make sure the efforts are complementary.
Thank you very much.
Other questions from the phone? Okay, thank you for that working group. I think that concludes the introduction of our working groups. And again, I really want to compliment the council for the questions. Great clarification questions and beneficial to all of us. Next, to review our next steps, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff Goldthorpe and Teresa Hennessy.
Okay. Well, the next step, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to send out an email to to all the council members with a request that you get back to us with any questions that remain on your mind, anything that you think that we should be doing that we didn't talk about today, any questions about what we're asking that didn't come up today that occurred to you after the meeting. Send an email to Teresa and I, and also to the working group chair that spoke today, and we will see that they're dealt with. Teresa?
Great, thanks, Jeff. So, upon completion of assignment of the working group chairs, which will be July 10th, so it's very quick for us to assemble those, we will have our first committee steering meeting with the chairs on July 30th. We'll send out a note for a date and time, so it'll be fairly quickly after the chairs have been appointed that we'll have our first committee meeting to ensure that we have the right alignment and we have sub-team members assigned to each of the working groups. Going forward after July 30th, we'll have a meeting on the third Thursday of every month to prepare for the council meetings that will occur on a quarterly basis.
Thank you, Jeff and Teresa. I'd like to make a few closing remarks before I ask Jeff for his closing remarks, and then Admiral Simpson. I'd like to thank all of you for your commitment and support of CSRIC 5. We have only started the process here today, and there is much more work to be done. I would like to encourage council members to come forward as candidates for working group chairs and to identify members within your own companies and perhaps talented resources that can serve on the working groups. Our next council meeting will be Wednesday, September 23rd, so if everyone could put that on their calendars and be here, that'd be great. In the interim, there will be the monthly steering committee meetings that Teresa mentioned on the third Thursday of every month that Teresa and Jeff will host. So with that, I'm going to turn it to Jeff for any closing comments before the Admiral.
You want to go first? Yeah, actually, Jeff's going to adjourn us. So, if I could, this is a really exciting time to be working in telecommunications. We have the confluence of a number of events and a number of factors that are really important. First is the continued dramatic increase in the functionality of networks and the services that are provided over networks. Just amazing. Second is significantly increased community and consumer reliance on those functionalities. And we are regularly seeing situations where consumers and communities that used to do something in a manual way now do it in an automated way, and now do it online out of the cloud in an automated way. That's great. It's efficient. It's more effective, but they're relying on it. So you then couple that with the continued increase in threats to Internet protocol-based systems and services, and we get either the perfect storm or we get the U.S. marketplace addressing the tension between those three in the best possible forward-leaning manner that continues to bring value to consumers, to communities, to your companies in that space. So the overarching theme of your work, I believe, should be to help us find that sweet spot, those sweet spots in the different topic areas that allow us to ensure that the wonderful capabilities provided by telecommunications continue to serve this nation well and don't negatively expose us to consequences that could have been avoided had we only gotten the right experts to talk about and help develop actionable steps from. So thanks so much for being a part of this, and I look forward to the work as we proceed.
Thanks, Dave. All I want to say is I have never, in all the years that I've been doing CSRIC and NRIC before that, I've never seen this much dialogue in a full council meeting. The working groups are always have a lot of dialogue, so that we're off to a great start. I want to thank you myself for serving on the council. I'm looking forward to working with you over the next couple of years. I wish you safe travels wherever you're headed after the meeting today. If you have some time to spend in D.C., it seems like it's a good day to do it. It's cooler, and I think the sun is out. Sun was out last time I checked. So see you in September.